I deliver this recording in what I believe will be the final hour of my life. I can only hope that when this message reaches home, it will be heard and taken with the utmost seriousness. My name is Gleen. I am, or was, the commander of the 4th Pirati Band, and I know my world has heard of me. For years, our pirates have raided worlds and trade routes with impunity. I am sure this part will be censored when or if it is broadcast successfully to our populace, but I want to say it anyway. We acted as agents of the governing council, with their permission, both tacit and explicit, depending on where we were going and who we were attacking. Sometimes, I admit, we struck at places outside of the concerns of our government, and of course, since it was outside of their concerns, who cared? Forgive me, the smoke is starting to make its way in. It won't be long now. I will be quick. We raided Terrera because it was easy and because the race seemed weak. We assumed Terrera would be an easy target. Whoever heard of a species that sacrifices mature, productive adults for their young when they can simply make more and enjoy doing so? When they first ventured into interstellar space and made contact with our enemies, it's probable that they had no idea that the invitation to join a trade alliance was an invitation to be invaded. But once they realized it, well, easy pickings, right? No grand military fleet, no massive space stations or networks of defenses. They had only begun to draft plans to harvest the energy of the stars on a large scale. So we hit the place a few capitals, blew up some bases. Oh, we had a grand old pirate time, as we always have, and we put ourselves in reach, which was one of our biggest mistakes. At first, we took communities easily, but then one of our people, during a harvest, grew annoyed at the sound of a crying infant. He shot it in the arms of what we now know was one of their females. No big deal, right? We thought wrong. The woman lost all reason and attacked our raiders. She was shot 16 times, but she beat one of us to death with his own weapon. That was when we found out something else about humans. They tell stories, a lot. This story was recorded, evidently, like many others. The sight of one of our officers killing an infant in its mother's arms, and then her beating him to death before being killed herself, sparked an outbreak of violence that cost me 4 companies in a day. Then one of my officers made a fatal mistake. Believing that their love for children was a weakness, he threatened to kill more of them if they didn't stand down. This only showed them we were monsters, and when humans decide something is dangerous to their young, they will stop at nothing to destroy it. Our interceptions of their communications showed that the Keelan Confederation was going to trade them weapons and technology to join the war in earnest. Our whole planet has gone mad with hatred for us. The screams of battle can still be heard in the background as I record this. Steal their goods, nobody cares. Kill an adult, they get upset but kill their young, and they lose all reason. They sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to protect what they cherish most. If they have any sense of self-preservation left when it comes to wiping us out, I can't find it. I tried negotiating, I tried trading, I tried warning and threatening them, and all it did was harden their resolve. Whatever you do, do not target their young. You'll doom us all. We thought their weakness for their offspring would make things easy, but we were wrong. This is my final warning. The humans are coming, and they are coming with a fury unmatched in the galaxy. I fear that by the time this message reaches you, it will be too late. The door is being breached now. Screams cut short, gunfire. It's over. The last transmission from the once mighty pirate fleet commander echoes through the galaxy. Since that time, humans have exterminated 4 military bases and launched suicide runs against entire fleets, crippling operations in 14 quadrants. The war is as good as lost. I recommend we offer terms to the Keelan Confederation that are favorable to peace, including a mandate that they cease supplying humans with weapons and technology. In the post-war period, we should propose to the Galactic Union that it be unlawful to employ human mercenaries or supply weapons to human armies. Furthermore, it should be made a war crime to target human young under any circumstances. Perhaps such news will help them realize that not all of us are the same as the late pirate lord. But will that work? Will it be enough to quell the storm we've unleashed? Many voices have asked this question, and I cannot provide an answer. The horrors we unleashed have awakened something primal and terrifying in the humans, something we vastly underestimated. The Keelan Confederation ships were tracked on the global net. Their first transmissions of technological data for interstellar travel had already been distributed to every government on Earth. Every session of the United Government, which began forming in the wake of the atrocities we committed, now begins with the same sound: a crying child, a shot from a pirate weapon, and a mother's screams. It is played in the new shipyards being built, in the infantry training grounds that have sprung up around the world, in the mech construction factories. Every day, new reports of human preparations are sent to the Keelan Confederation government, and the question that haunts them is always the same: how much longer? The monitoring of Terran communications revealed more of their cultural exchange information stories, songs, poetry, movies, histories. Days before the first transport ships were due to arrive on Earth, their horror movies caught the attention of our chief anthropologist. "Their horror movies are concerning," the chief anthropologist remarked, his scales twitching with anxiety. "Not the alien invasion movies," a politician scoffed. "Those are over-the-top nonsense, yes, those too." The anthropologist replied, "But the problem is that the only things they consider truly frightening are gods, angels, demons, or impossible monsters. Anything less, they don't fear. If it can't break a planet, it isn't a threat worth worrying about to them. You've seen what they did to the admiral of the pirate fleet, haven't you? They tore his limbs off. Humans are the most insanely protective species I've ever encountered. They don't just fight, they annihilate their enemies. I'm telling you. They are convinced that our enemies want to kill their children. And when that belief takes hold, they will stop at nothing to destroy the threat. We may be inviting disaster unless we tread carefully." The politician dismissed the anthropologist's concerns, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. 3 months later, the Keelan admiral watched as human-piloted ships defied all standard combat doctrines. Fighters skipped across the atmosphere like smooth stones, confusing ground defenses and unleashing devastating fire on planetary installations. Contrary to all established strategy, the human transports descended at breakneck speeds, landing before the area was even secured. "Put the surface on screen," the admiral barked, a sense of dread gnawing at him. The screen flickered to life, showing the transports opening and human jumpers emerging, their machines lumbering with massive guns and rockets. The human heavy infantry had no interest in capturing positions, they were there to destroy everything. The admiral could only watch in horror as human mechs unleashed a barrage of rockets on anything in their path, their pilots seemingly driven by a deep-seated rage. This wasn't war, this was revenge, pure and simple. The sight of a human infantryman gutting a Pankan soldier with a bayonet confirmed the admiral's worst fears. These were not mere soldiers, they were avengers. Weeks later, at the Keelan Confederacy Assembly, the atmosphere was tense. 14 worlds in 14 months, the revered speaker stated, his voice heavy with the implications. The war's progress has completely reversed itself. The Pankan are offering terms of surrender, some strange, some understandable. But there is another question we must address: will the humans be willing to make peace? The assembly fell silent, the weight of the question hanging over them. Transmissions from human military operations ranged from the insane to the terrifying. Daring solo operations by human officers had become routine. They were known across the galaxy as war apes, a moniker that seemed to fuel their relentless advance. "They are not a completely irrational species," the revered speaker continued. "If we make it a war crime galaxy-wide to harm their young and hand over any violators to the Terran government, they might see the value in peace. But will that truly be enough?" The assembly hesitated, knowing that they had unleashed a force they could barely comprehend, let alone control. The assembly members sat in stunned silence, the implications of the revered speaker's proposal weighing heavily on them. The question hung in the air: would such an offer be enough to placate the humans? They had underestimated the Terrans from the beginning, mistaking their lack of initial defense for weakness, their compassion for their young as a vulnerability to be exploited. But now, with the war turning against them so dramatically, they had to consider every option, no matter how unorthodox. The revered speaker looked around the chamber, seeing the uncertainty in the eyes of his colleagues. The fear was palpable, and it was not just fear of the humans, it was fear of what they had become. The once predictable balance of power in the galaxy had been shattered by a species that fought not just for survival, but for vengeance. Finally, one of the senior advisors broke the silence, his voice trembling slightly. "If we declare it a war crime to harm their young and offer unconditional surrender on behalf of the Pankan, do we truly believe that the humans will accept peace? Or will they continue their relentless advance until every last one of our enemies is annihilated?" The question was one that had plagued the minds of many in the assembly. The humans had shown a capacity for destruction that far exceeded anything they had imagined. Their rage seemed boundless, their determination unyielding. The revered speaker sighed, his scales shimmering under the harsh lights of the chamber. "We must believe that they will see reason," he replied, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. "We must believe that they will accept our offer if we show that we understand their values, that we are willing to protect what they hold dear." The debate continued for hours, with various members of the assembly offering their opinions, some supporting the revered speaker's proposal, others expressing doubts and fears. The possibility of continuing the war was considered, but quickly dismissed as madness. The humans had proven themselves more than capable of outmatching the Pankan, even with the limited resources they had been given so far. The Keelan Confederacy had no desire to face the full brunt of their military might. Eventually, a consensus was reached. The Assembly would offer the terms as proposed, hoping that the humans would see it as a genuine attempt at peace. They would make it a war crime to harm human young, enforce strict penalties for any violations, and offer full reparations to the families of those who had suffered at the hands of the pirates. It was a gamble, but it was the only option they had left. As the Assembly members dispersed, the revered speaker remained behind, his thoughts consumed by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The fate of the galaxy now hinged on the response of a species that had proven to be far more complex, far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The transmissions from the human fleets continued to pour in, each one more disturbing than the last. Reports of their relentless pursuit of the Pankin, their refusal to take prisoners, and their utter disregard for their own lives in the pursuit of victory all served to underscore the severity of the situation. The revered speaker knew that they were walking a tightrope, one misstep away from complete annihilation. He could only hope that the humans would accept their offer of peace, and that the galaxy could begin to heal from the wounds of this brutal conflict. The following days were a blur of activity as the Keelan Confederacy prepared to send their proposal to the Terran government. Diplomatic channels were opened, messages were exchanged, and every precaution was taken to ensure that the humans understood the sincerity of their offer. The revered speaker personally oversaw the drafting of the terms, making sure that every detail was meticulously planned. The proposal was sent with a solemnity befitting the gravity of the situation. As they awaited a response, the galaxy held its breath. The outcome of this war, and the future of countless civilizations, rested on the decision of the humans. Would they choose peace, or would their rage continue to drive them forward, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the response came. The Terran government had received the proposal and was considering it. The entire galaxy seemed to pause, waiting for the verdict. Days passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Then, a message was broadcast across the galaxy, a message that would determine the fate of the war. The Terran government had accepted the terms. The war was over. The Assembly erupted in a mixture of relief and disbelief. The humans had agreed to peace, though the cost had been high. The galaxy could finally begin to rebuild, though the scars of the conflict would remain for generations to come. The revered speaker watched as his colleagues celebrated, a deep sense of weariness settling over him. They had narrowly avoided disaster, but at what price? The galaxy would never be the same. The humans had emerged from the conflict as a force to be reckoned with, their reputation as the war apes cemented in the minds of every species. The Keelan Confederacy had managed to secure peace, but they knew that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The humans had shown them the true meaning of determination, of what it meant to protect what you love at all costs. And while the galaxy had survived, the memory of the war, and the lessons learned from it, would linger long after the last battle had been fought. The revered speaker looked out at the stars, wondering what the future would hold. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and it was up to them to ensure that it was not squandered. The humans had taught them a lesson they would never forget: never underestimate the power of a species driven by the need to protect their own. The galaxy began to rebuild, the wounds of the war slowly healing. But the shadow of the conflict loomed large, a reminder of the price of underestimating the strength of others. The Keelan Confederacy took steps to ensure that such a mistake would never be made again. Diplomatic relations with the Terran government were strengthened, and efforts were made to learn more about this enigmatic species that had turned the tide of war so decisively. As the years passed, the memory of the war became a part of galactic history, studied and analyzed by scholars and leaders alike. The story of the Terrans, the war apes, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of arrogance and the power of resolve. The galaxy had been forever changed, but it had also been united in a way that had never been seen before. The revered speaker, now an elder statesman, reflected on these changes with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The galaxy had faced the abyss and had come out the other side stronger, more united, and with a newfound respect for the power of the human spirit. The revered speaker knew that the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The galaxy had been given a chance to start anew, to build a better future, and to forge alliances that would stand the test of time. The humans had shown them the way, and now it was up to the rest of the galaxy to follow their example. The war had ended, but the work of rebuilding had just begun. And in that work, the revered speaker saw the potential for a new era of peace and cooperation, one where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and this time they would not squander it. The revered speaker looked out at the stars, a sense of calm settling over him. The war was over and the future was theirs to shape. The galaxy would never forget the lessons learned, and in that he found solace. "Ah, Ambassador, to what do I owe the pleasure?" The Terran ambassador, a faintly whitish male with almond eyes from a region the Terran identified as Japan, asked and gave a polite half-bow on the video screen. The tan face was absurdly expressive compared to the reptilian, scaled face of a Kenyan, but once you got used to it, it was almost graceful. As a species, they confused Ambassador Kalp. They could be very gregarious, open and friendly to a degree that was initially off-putting to the Kenyan race, but the openness of their culture had made it easier to deal with them than most Confederation members when it came to trade. Then there was the matter of the war with the Pankan Alliance. The vengefulness of the humans who rampaged like unleashed monsters became the main focus of propaganda to revitalize the war effort. Now, after a string of victories that saw the various member races of the Pankan Alliance surrender, only the Pankan remained, and they were done. "I'm presenting marvelous news," Kalpi began. "The Pankan have offered to surrender. We wanted to invite you to the negotiations regarding terms." Kalpi trailed off as the human ambassador's face lost all expression. "Are there conditions?" Unconditional Ambassador Nobunaga asked. "Well, no," Kalp replied. "Then we aren't finished with them yet," Nobunaga replied, cutting the transmission short. Kalp hissed in frustration. "I told the Pankan it wouldn't work. All that's left is to die out or surrender completely." He muttered, then thought, "On the other hand, having these maniacs on our side completely upsets the balance of power in the galaxy, in the Confederation's favor. Yes, I think this will work out fine as long as we craft a rational policy." 2 months later, the Pankan Empire, the precursor to the Pankan Alliance, which had bullied 20-odd races into submission, had its foundation on a trio of systems with 9 worlds each. All of these had either been habitable or easily Pank-formed, to suit their desires many generations earlier. These 27 planets comprised the industrial, spiritual, economic, and political heart of their empire. As world after world crumbled and the terms of peace were constantly rejected, they grew ever more desperate. They understood the Confederation, but they had not understood its newest member. They did not know their enemy. Some might argue that they could not have known their enemy, and that ignorance brought them ever closer to defeat until all that remained were the 3 core systems. The war apes had no interest in preserving, occupying, or protecting anything on those worlds. While they had shown mercy to subordinate races, the Pankan were slowly pushed toward extinction. "We are offering terms of surrender." The Pankan kept repeating, but the Terran always replied, "Tell us when you offer unconditional surrender," and then cut the transmission. Going through their Confederate enemies was a desperate gamble to find some terms other than unconditional. Now, 2 months after that debacle, 3 core worlds had been glassed clean of major cities, major sea lanes had been mined with self-replicating magnetic mines, and all energy supply points were utterly eliminated. World after world teetered on the brink of returning to a hunter-gatherer state to survive at all. Still, the Pankan fought on. They raised smaller, more mobile ships and proclaimed that nobody could fight forever, that if they just continued, the Terran would give them something. The Terran continued to give the Pankan glass worlds. Within 4 more months, the Confederation was begging their allies to stop, and by then only 3 worlds remained that had not been ruined, including the Pankan homeworld. Ambassador Nobunaga went personally to the Confederation homeworld for the conference. The Pankan ambassador appeared on the screen, his own white scales cracked, shreds of skin that hadn't properly shed from the stress. He held out his finger claws with desperation. "If we surrender unconditionally, what will you do with us?" The entire Confederation listened with rapt attention. "I will tell you what we will not do," Nobunaga said. "And I tell you that only so you know we never intend this for anyone. We will not make your race into slaves. We will not take your religions. We will not occupy any world that still has an intact population. We will not slaughter what is left of you. You can even keep your government." These were not exactly terms in the traditional sense. It was a list of will-nots which still revealed more mercy for the Pankan than any Terran had shown thus far. The Great Council was filled with seats of full-time resident races: avian, reptilian, feline, among others. There were even a few species that looked similar to Terran in their apeish flesh bodies, but all were set to muttering with some degree of relief. "Then we surrender unconditionally." "Just please stop," the Pankan hissed and went down to his knees. It was not a traditional Pankan gesture, but it was one the other ambassadors, who had consumed abundant Terran media, would recognize as intended for a Terran audience. "Then we have peace," Nobunaga stated. "Here are the terms: the Pankan are prohibited space travel for the next 100 years. Their remaining worlds will be converted to agrarian industry only, and those worlds we have left in Pankin hands, which still have living populations. We'll be open to immigration to all members of the Confederation, but with the first land and territory pick going to Terran for the first 5 years. Additionally, the Pankin remaining worlds will be liable to a 20 trillion credit war indemnity to be provided to our military veterans, government, and the families of those children your pirates slew. Ambassador Nobunaga laid out the terms that the Earth government had settled on, and the tail of the Pankin ambassador stiffened as if he had died and undergone rigor mortis. It wasn't hard to understand why. With those terms, the Terran would take the best spot of every world in some of the richest systems and utterly cripple the Pankin homeworlds for generations to come. With no space travel and an agrarian economy, they were essentially prisoners on their own worlds. As for the survivors on the other worlds, after most of them starved to death thanks to ruined supply chains, they would be a tiny minority, with the high populations of humans occupying the top spots and the Confederation's people following hot on their heels. They may just beg for flights back to their intact worlds. And just like that, the Terran Empire had been born. We submit, the Pankin ambassador said, his face down, his entire body a broken husk of its former self, as he lived to see the fall of his once mighty empire. I know, Nobunaga replied, then turned around to face the Confederation. Now we are done with them. Maybe now we can all live in and enjoy the fruits of peace. With two-way transmissions from Earth, the polite applause of the Confederation was drowned out by the cheers of the entire Terran homeworld. I hope we didn't make a terrible mistake, Ambassador Kalp thought as the cheers went on. Over the next 5 years, Pankin society collapsed on the worlds where they still had survivors. Devoid of both the infrastructure and the knowledge of how to survive outside of a modern world, the Pankin of countless worlds fell to turning their weapons on one another, wiping out entire populations of survivors until they ran out of modern weapons. Then resuming the process with whatever they could find. They no longer had the means for even medieval-level societies on most worlds and were reduced to hunter-gatherer scavenging. Some never knew the fates of their homeworlds or that peace had come at last, all finding out the same way humans. The victors in the brutal war touched down and began to settle the most ideal parts of the world, converting it from Pankinian arid climates to the sorts of worlds favored by humans. The Pankin who spied these new structures either begged or fled, but they were too broken to actually fight, and even if they hadn't been, hunter-gatherer societies do not always eat well. The races of the victorious Confederation were quick to address the matter of what would happen to the Pankin. We would like to send observers and scientists to study how they've adapted to this social change and ensure they are not brutalized in the aftermath of the victory several races requested independently. They say the victory, not our victory, and not your victory. I suppose I can't blame them for that, Grand Presider Jackson thought as he watched the view screen. One of the Avan species made it this time. He was quick to answer, of course you are free to do so, but we expect most survivors to request to be relocated to their home system. They will not be happy living under us, I think. However, you are free to observe them for a few months as our colonies are established. A transmission came in as soon as that one was disconnected, this one directly from the official representative of the Keelan, the first human ally, and perhaps the closest and most liked by humanity. As that race had given humans technology and travel capability in the aftermath of the Pankin pirate attack on Earth. Grand Presider Jackson stroked his dark beard. The transmission hadn't been accepted yet because he knew what the Keelan was likely to ask. He took a deep breath. We can't keep this secret for long enough to matter. It's better that we come clean now, he swallowed. The question of how humans were colonizing worlds so quickly was bound to come up. He hit the green accept button, and the pale lizard man's naturally severe face came on screen. Grand Presider of the Terran ascended. I hope you're well, the great speaker of the Keelan Empire began. I am, and I hope the same for you. The two leaders bowed slightly in their seats. Despite their differences in species, they had common ground that made it easy to get along quite well. It didn't hurt that the Keelan had none of the prejudices that had still existed, though slowly continued to die out in Jackson's youth over the color of his skin. The existence of aliens more advanced than humans made that absurd outlook even more marginalized, and the Pankin murders of children, regardless of all other factors, buried what was left of it. If anyone still thought that way, they were quiet enough about it that Grand Presider James Stoneworth Jackson expected it would die when age and time took them. I am also the Keelan great speaker replied. Forgive me if I bypass our usual pleasantries. I'm afraid I have an important question for you. You want to ask about our colonization rate, the Grand Presider asked. Yes, you've placed 20 outposts on over 20 different worlds in the last few months. There is some concern about whether or not your planet can handle the kind of mass immigration it would take to sustain that. The Keelan questioned, carefully constructing his inquiry to be benign, even with good reason. Not to worry, great speaker. My world has had many mass migrations in the past. We've learned a great deal about how to handle it, and our current solutions are quite effective. Grand Presider Jackson promised, unable to constrain a smile when he said it. Our study of your species has shown, strangely enough, that you put abundant resources into few young over a long period of time. This is strange to us, who think nothing of losing a few along the way, but it seems this should make things harder, not easier, for you, the great speaker replied. James Jackson politely inclined his head. Yes, but our children are capable of a great deal at a relatively early age, so we've adopted two strategies. Our facilities on those worlds are cloning from our vast stores of DNA here at home. Our colonies will then have workers maintaining the minor infrastructure, while others will raise and educate the cloned population. If we repeat the process every 10 years, and each parental set raises 5 children, then as adults, they plus their parents do 5 more. The Grand Presider let the sentence fall away. The great speaker was no mathematician, but he didn't need to be. Exponential population growth, he said, his eyes ticking a little. Yes, of course. We'll continue to send supplies, and the billions in credits the Pankin will pay will help support buying what we need from our closest allies. Grand Presider Jackson let that sentence hang as he had the one before, and silence passed between the two leaders. The next question was totally benign. Aren't you concerned about the possible problems that might occur from that? What about when people from different worlds meet the possibility of incest and the like? The nictitating membranes of the Keelan Confederation leader's eyes had picked up their pace. Grand Presider Jackson kept his smile calm. We are aware of the possibility, but the risk is very low compared to the reward of having 100 or so viable colonies in a relative handful of years. It isn't anything that can't be solved without simple mandatory DNA testing to ensure a lack of relation. Then, within a few generations, the many populations will be sufficiently different through our relatively quick pace of mutation that it will cease to be anything but a curiosity. Great Speaker Callan did not remain on the line with the Terran Presider for much longer, nor did he bring his findings to the other leaders. In 20 years, they'll have fully functional colonies. In 40, they will be self-sufficient and begin exporting finished goods of their own. In 100, they'll have an empire larger than the entire Confederation combined, he thought, sobered by the realization. The worlds of the former Pankin were good ones, but they were far from the only ones. However, most colonies were planned for generations before finally being established. Immigration was slow for most races, but Terrans seemed to go mad for exploration. Phrases like "first in Kilroy was here" were found burned into moons on uninhabited systems, and rogue colonists were already settling outlying places or venturing off into the unknown where, most likely, they would die. But who knows what we'll find out there one day, he asked himself, realizing that these adaptable and clever Terrans who went rogue might survive, or even thrive, in the void. He walked away from the electron spin communication relay and saw the book that lay on his table. Terran books were becoming popular commodities, but because they were heavy, bulky physical media, most simply got them as electronic documents. But this one was a gift. The title was from one of their most popular authors of the 21st century and part of a large series. Who endures, he read, about a woman who built an empire to save the one she loved and burned an empire to avenge the one she lost. He pondered the book's significance, wondering if it was a warning or simply a gift. Enough waiting. I have to explain this to the others. He told himself, and then went to do exactly that, all while trying not to wonder what kind of fleets 100 human worlds might muster up in another 100 years. The thought of such a fleet was chilling, yet he couldn't shake the curiosity about what might happen in the future. The Terran Empire was just beginning, and its full potential had yet to be realized. The Confederation leaders would have to tread carefully in the coming years, balancing their alliances and their fears as they watched the rapid expansion of the newest and perhaps most dangerous member of their alliance. As the Keelan walked into the Grand Chamber where the other Confederation leaders were assembled, he took a deep breath, knowing that his words would carry weight, and that the future of the galaxy might hinge on how the Confederation responded to the Terran expansion. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber, we must discuss the Terran situation. They have begun to colonize at an unprecedented rate, and their methods are innovative, to say the least. We must decide how to approach this development. Do we support them? Do we limit them? Or do we simply observe and hope for the best? The room fell into a tense silence, each leader lost in their own thoughts. The implications were vast, and the potential consequences of any decision were even more so. One by one, the leaders began to speak, each offering their perspective, their concerns, and their hopes. Some were in favor of supporting the Terrans, seeing them as a powerful ally that could secure the Confederation's dominance in the galaxy. Others were more cautious, fearing the rapid rise of a species that had shown such ruthlessness in war and such ambition in peace. We cannot ignore the fact that they have taken worlds that were once pagan and turned them into thriving colonies in mere months, one leader said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and apprehension. But we must also remember that they have done so through methods that we might find troubling. The debate continued for hours, with no clear consensus emerging. The Keelan remained quiet for much of it, listening, absorbing, and considering his own position. Finally, as the discussion began to wind down, he spoke again. "I understand your concerns," he said, "and I share them. But I also see an opportunity. The Terrans have shown that they can adapt and thrive in ways that few other species can. If we can harness that potential, guide it, we may be able to shape the future of this galaxy in ways we never imagined. But we must be careful. The Terrans are not like us. They think differently, act differently, and their ambitions may not always align with ours. We must find a way to work with them while ensuring that we do not lose control of our own destiny." The room fell silent again, this time with a sense of gravity that had been missing before. The Keelan's words had struck a chord, and the leaders knew that the decisions they made in the coming days would shape the course of history. Finally, the presiding leader spoke. "We will continue this discussion tomorrow. In the meantime, I urge each of you to consider the implications of what we have heard today. The future of the Confederation may depend on it." As the leaders filed out of the chamber, the Keelan remained behind, staring out at the vastness of space visible through the chamber's great windows. He knew that the galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one in which the Terrans would play a central role. And he couldn't shake the feeling that, despite all their efforts, they were only beginning to understand the true nature of their newest ally. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.